I would like to ask you some questions. Why is it within life's own body that there are so many apparent contradictions? Why are there so many apparent contradictions, of course, on the next level, within man's own existence? Why does life seem to be so filled with contradictions? Beyond all the old stories that we shouldn't have to back up and bump into or run over much anymore, because it's past the point of even getting tire damage now. Once you back up, there's nothing there to hurt you. But beyond the old ideas of gods fighting anti-gods and good fighting evil, such contradictions. And when I say contradictions, I'm really including the complete field of conflict, such as one of the good old ones that is still contemporary about what is the most important, or what is the only important, what is the only aspect that affects man, his nature or the nurturing of man, his environment or his heredity. And when I say contradictory, back in the city, they can prove, they can come up with statistics, they can prove either viewpoint. That is, either viewpoint seems, from a whatever position you might be in at the time, would seem to be absolutely defensible, that it might be the prevailing one, that we might be this close to having enough info to actually prove once and for all that such and such is true. Why? What is going on that within the life of man, which is the life of life, within the body of life itself, why do we have in the area that would seem to be uniquely man, not simply the conflict of eat or be at, be a dinner or be a diner, but why does there seem to be in the uniquely human area of ideas, attempted mapping of the human experience, do there seem to be a continuing flow of contradictory maps, contradictory theories, conflicting ideas, people attempting to navigate the seas that are man, and somebody charts and says, over here are the dangerous areas, and over here is where there's smooth sailing, and you pick up another chart, and you think, well, whoever the cartographer was here, he's talking about a completely different ocean. He's talking about another coastline, and he's not. What is going on? Now, based upon some of my descriptions of late, my picturesque descriptions, I could ask you, is it simply a matter that we're dealing with imperfect information? That's what I keep referring to from a certain view for the last few meetings. Is it because of imperfect information that there seems to be in humanity, and assuming that you're laterally expanded enough to be a little above, even on a cold day, to be a little above the general average of consciousness and perception of ordinary city dwellers, that there's enough in you that you can feel, already wired up in you, not due to the educational process, but you can just feel it down in the molecular structure of you and thus all people, that there are conflicting stories about the same events. There are conflicting maps covering substantially the same areas, and that when you get the least bit above the ordinary city level of perception, you can feel within yourself, not theoretically, but you can feel within yourself that there is something going on in life that I could take position A, I can feel it. I could defend position A, conversely, I could accept position A. But I could also feel, I understand how position B can be presented. I can understand why that there are large numbers of people believe that position B is correct. Is this based upon imperfect information? Is it something else? What possible purpose? You have got to have some notion now of what I am trying to hint at when I speak about you should have a kind of curiosity that runs across the topology of life, that you, if it did not have negative connotations, that you're trying to do like rubbings on gravestones to pick up the actual surface of what life is about, not a two-dimensional plotting of a coastline, but the actual surface that your curiosity should be. Why, what possible purpose does life have in letting and forcing, I say letting in my continuing, charming, and charitable manner, that it forces humanity to be divided up into conflicting camps, into conflicting ideas, into maps that are not unified, into maps that do not, they're covering the same, and at any particular time, at any particular place, one of the maps seems correct and the other one does not, and all you've got to do is sneeze, fall down your knees, tear your pants, stand up, look around, and you look at the other map, and it's correct. What is going on? Now, I am suggesting by asking you the third time, can it be just imperfect information? I am trying to suggest and hint to you that there is another way in which you could pursue this. There's another way in which you can consider the matter. How about, since I brought up the environment versus heredity, it is a prime example. Try and feel, when I say ask yourself, try and feel that you in some way were a four-dimensional chiropractor, I guess, or a phrenologist. Isn't that who used to try and feel bumps on people's heads? And that you're trying to feel parts of life's body, and you're trying to figure out what in the hell is going on in there. Why are you raised up over in this particular spot? And why is it that I continually find that you seem to be raised in one spot, and if I feel around from a dorsal to an anti-dorsal side, if there's a lump over here, there seems to be a lump back here. Why does there always seem to be at least two lumps and they're in some way connected? Or why is it that I can apparently have a map or hear of a map that says some area of life's body is grouped into three distinct parts? Or I hear a map that says that there are only four possible ways in which this area of life's body can be correctly mapped. I hear it, and by God, it's right. There are only four. I can't think of any more. Why? Why? Why could that be? And you try to feel of it. You can't study it. Not in the ordinary yellow circuit sense. You can't play with some form of logic, symbolic or otherwise, and come to any decision about it. It's almost as though you're having to feel of it, that you have got to get the lay of the land. What is it going on in life's body? Back to the example I said was prime. What could be going on that there is a distinct part of life's body that's been going on all these thousands of years now that we know of, that there is some part of life's body that does not want to believe that it's all in the genes. Now, if it was simply a matter of imperfect information, we've got a problem here, because life would know better, that life would not be dealing with imperfect information. But there is some distinct part of life's body as manifested by groups of men throughout history. But there's a distinct part of life's body that is vocal, that does not want to believe that it's all in the genes. Now, how can that be, if indeed it is? How can it be that even I know better? And then on some higher level, on some expanded level, there's still a part of life's body that does not want to believe it, as witnessed by the fact that there is a continuing group of people who say it's not true. That being the case, that is a 3D reflection that there is some sizable part of life's own being that does not like that. How can that be? Can it be that there is still some part of life's body that simply does not want to face up to its own mechanical nature? Could such matters in fact be in any way connected with the at least semi little spurts of mutations that produces interest in affairs such as this? If it is not simply a matter of imperfect information, then how about another possibility, instead of me just leaving it with you? How about a possibility that life has yet to make a decision in this matter? Or a real troubling, that means an extreme right angle, corollary to that is not simply that life has yet to make a decision about it, but that life may have made a decision about it, but due to the flaw in the time frame from one dimension to another, we are always behind. And what seems to be contrary maps, contradictory pictures and possibilities within life's own body, within life's own nervous system, that could be indecision, that life doesn't know, all right, am I going to face up to this? Is this true on my level? Is the correct map to me going to be this or that? And it stays with man, through man, for thousands of years as being a philosophical question, when it can be that life has already decided. But then once you understand what happens when you're in a lesser dimension, it is not simply a matter that you are linearly behind the times. It's much worse than that. If you were just linearly behind the times, then even people in the city would have some hope. That is, if I live another 3,000 or 4,000 years, I may know what was true 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. You don't even have that hope linearly. Well, of course, you don't want to tell people out in the city that, because they certainly believe in linear hope. If some part of life's body believes in linear hope, there would be no afterlife pictures. But information, if it was behind, if being in one dimension put you behind the time, all the thing I was mentioning in passing was it would not be linear, the time differential. But it would be that the possibility I'm pointing out is that life could have already decided what was true, could have already taken appropriate action, and still due to the imperfect nature, that is the incomplete nature of what we see compared to what at least one higher dimension would be, then it would appear to be still in flux. It would still appear to be an unanswered question. It would still appear to be indecision. Then again, if anybody followed this, which I wouldn't hold my breath based upon your bright faces, if that be true, if any of you can begin to understand the possibility that if we are in a part of a larger structure that has at least one more dimension, at least, then what seems to be time here as opposed to time there to be otherwise, and life could have already made a decision, and we're yet to know it, if you can follow this right quick. But do you understand that would be yet another piece of armament here in the 3D world for those who would say, wait a minute, everything is preordained. It would even be worse than that, would be what apparently is going to happen here at our level. It's already happened. It'd be like the poor little, little 2D creatures here, wondering if such and such is going to come back into their existence and happen again, if it's going to happen. But it's already happened. They just can't see it yet. Well, it's enough to make you sort of... Even ordinary people say, they wring their hands and say, oh, I fear for tomorrow. And the way we're destroying the planet and killing each other and thinking bad thoughts or whatever it is. If people say, I really worry about tomorrow. What if even they do not know what they're saying? But the real worry about tomorrow is tomorrow's already come and gone. The shadow of it is yet to get down into our dimension. The exhaust from it, the bus already went through. Except we don't know it until we smell the exhaust fumes. And then it's real. it just makes the souffle of cause and effect just fall flat. Back in the city, they have sayings. They've had a whole bunch of sayings similar to this, but I'll sort of wrap it up into one gigantic historical example of this saying. And the saying, my wrap-up would be, my conglomeration, would be, the best fools are those who are a little wise. Or you could say, are you sure that if somebody that's read one book is any smarter than somebody that's read no books? Are you sure? At any rate, they would say, there's been variations of this, that the best fools are made up of people that's got they're just a little wise. Now what that is saying, if I'm going to have to translate it for you, I'm going to anyway, is that for optimum results, the optimum effect is one needs contrast. If at a 3D level, what ordinary people would consider to be a fool, just an outright fool, just a plain fool, that's one thing. But over here you got a fool that's a little wise. That is, it's a fool with just a modicum of pretensions, that he does not know how foolish he is from this ordinary view. Now that's the one that makes the better fool, rather than just somebody that's just a fool. Compared to the two, somebody that's just a fool, you just dismiss. They're not even in the running. You can just dismiss them as being pitiful. They're no longer a fool once you have the contrast of a fool that's a little wise. The purpose in this paragraph is not fools and etc. It is contrast. Could any of you see that perhaps conflict, apparent contradictions, might be synonymous with contrast? If you're going to have optimum results, if you're going to have the most extreme effect, apparently, running in a 3D world, of one thing apparently preceding something else, that one thing apparently had an effect on this in the 3D world, it requires contrast for optimum results. Back to part one of tonight, me speaking of the question as to what might be up a life having these apparent, ongoing, continuing, conflicting maps. Confrontational views of the same area. Could any of you see the possibility of life using contrast to produce optimum effects within itself? No? Could any of you suspect that life's own nervous system, which is where we all are, could become involved with such activity as this in its own need for a heightened, for an enhanced 3D feeling of contrast within itself? The more extreme from the norm, within certain limits, the greater is the contrast. If the extreme gets too great, you don't see the contrast. Whatever it was just goes off the sensory spectrum, goes outside the electromagnetic field. It goes beyond the area of even being of apparent interest to humanity. But within those limits, the further away from the norm, the further away from whatever would be the accepted mode of thought, behavior, and feeling of that neighborhood, the further something would be going within those limits to still be perceptible, the greater would be the contrast. How much more could I describe this kind of activity? It's not just insane, per se, because it would have to be insane, relatively speaking, like everything else. We would have to contrast it with something else. It's not revolutionary to the point that if people that life tells this stuff to, like me, in some way we're playing with real justice now, but it's not in some way that such people are really dangerous to the city. Only those dangerous to the city are those that are outside the spectrum of a real contrast. We're not talking about in this kind of activity. But can you see that if there was any possible validity to me asking or proposing the possibility that this could be a kind of enhanced 3D contrast to life's own perception of itself internally, its own feeling about what was going on, then could you see that that would be a splendid description from almost any view that any of you could take, from any possible view within the group of people who have some understanding of what this is, that that would be a very good description of what this is. What it has given to your life. It hadn't given you the ability to fly through the air and read minds and raise the dead like you may have suspected or hoped for originally, but what has it given? Would it not be a fair description to say it has given you not just an enhanced, but a surprising, a normally unavailable way in which to contrast ordinary existence, routine thought, mundane feeling, common expectations, a way to contrast it. That would apparently be, from one view, what religions were about. I can't believe I'm still talking about religion or even using it as an example. Maybe I'm getting behind the times. Does anybody check? Do people still go to church? Is anybody still interested? Are those buildings still out there? Do they still have rabbis and priests? Phew. At any rate, you could look at what used to be called religions as being an attempted contrast. The contrast is all, I might point out, in the thinking of action, not in the action itself, because none of the religions believed, none of the religions taught that you could act this way. You could think about acting that way. And boy, was that a contrast, though. Wow, what if I could do that? Gee. It's like they could talk a good contrast. Let me paraphrase I'm not sure it's limited. I started to say just a good old down-home southern phrase, but I believe I've heard variations of this in other parts of life. Earthly gland. My variation would be, when you're a dimension short, you're always a day late. I'm now jumping back and referring you to some of what I was talking about the possibility of this not just being a matter of imperfect information coming to man, but it could be that there is the continual lacking time element, so that life could either be still undecided about these particular apparent conflicting maps and opinions, or it has decided and it has yet to fall within our time frame. That's why I was bringing up this variation of that phrase, that no matter what the apparent situation, no matter what the apparent question under discussion was, this is always true. If you're a dimension short, you're always a day late. You can't ever catch up. You don't need to just worry about being $1 short and a day late. You can't ever pay the rent. You can't ever buy the real nourishment you need. You can't ever catch your car payment up. You can't ever catch your brains up. You can't ever catch the payments on your opinions up. If you're a dimension short, it doesn't matter what you read. If there was any possibility of reading your way into paradise, reading your way into the bushes, into a higher state of consciousness, and you're short a dimension, you're always one book behind. No matter how fast you read, as soon as you read the one that was the book of the age, the book of the day, the book that explained everything, by the time you got to the end of the book, it would be like this. that somebody, that is some part of life, announced, it's been superseded. The brand new one has just hit the stores, and you got to read it now. And you run and read it. And if it was the book of the age, the book of the day, the explanation of everything as it is now, by the time you got to the last page, reading as fast as you could, you'd be a day late. There'd be another book out. When you're short the dimension, and the initial dimension, as I've been describing it, being the continuous awareness of time, as long as you're short that dimension, you're always a day late. Anything that you think you understand, it's outdated. Any question you believe you have that is surely the pressing question of our age. Maybe someone's asked something similar, but no one understood it with your precision, with the depth of your inquiry and your concern. As long as you are a dimension short, you are always a day late. It doesn't matter if there was an answer came to your question. It wouldn't do you any good. The question was a day late. The mapping is a day late. Now I understand this one aspect. Now I understand my particular attitude toward family life, toward men, toward women, toward money, toward anything. Now I understand. You're a day late. If the dimension of time was there, if you were not a dimension short, it would not be a matter of, now I understand. You can't understand now. If you're going to preface it with, now I got it, if you're going to do that, you're the same sort that's going to believe, well, now I can learn from my mistakes. It's too late. If people could actually learn from their mistakes, I know some of you choked on this a while back. One or two of you really thought you had a rocket slipped into your billfold. But let me see if I might wrap it up here with just a one-liner. If people actually learn from their mistakes, nobody would die. If you can hear, that wraps it up. You can't learn from your mistakes when the order is not correct. And as long as you're a dimension short, as long as you're living, as long as you are thinking, as long as your apparent consciousness, your mechanism of all perceptions, is a dimension short, you're always a day late. Nothing will ever be up to date. You're always attempting to stick a banner in the ground of some territory that you think you just won. But it's too late. It's useless. Nobody wants that anymore. You think, well, it was hard fought for. I'm glad I'm here. Now I've overcome the fears I used to have in this one particular area, and I'm going to drive down the standard. Here I am. This is mine. I've staked out some new share of the bushes. This is not just run-of-the-mill, ordinary territory. This is something new. This is a new area of my own nervous system that I have reconnoitered, cut out the bushes, cut down the vines, fought off the wild little beasties and the fairies. It's now mine. I'll stick up a banner, maybe a little tent, a lean-to. Nobody cares. You think you're defending something, or you think, well, boy, I should be proud of this. The gods surely, boy, it's a shame they all died and went away, because if they were still around, they would be so proud of me. Not many people could have done this. Nobody cares. It's too late. You're a day late. You still feel like there is a bus trip going on. You feel like that time is something that you get on somewhere, and if you think about it, it may move along, or if you're late, you can be aware of it. Other people should be aware of it. It's a clock. It's a way to keep this thing from running into that thing. It's a way to understand that what you do here, you're going to pay for, you're going to reap the rewards. It's a way that the farmers tell when to plant, when to sow, when to cut it down, and it's not. You're a dimension short. Anywhere that you can get to, anywhere that you can say, well, now, and then fill in the blank. Now I understand. Now I see the light. Now I got it. And of course, even worse is such things as, well, now could I ask you this? Or to ask yourself, now, should I consider doing this? Now, did I see a little more clearly? Should I redo what I did? Any time that the territory, any time that the apparent idea, any time that the apparent interest is expressed, and the expression begins, now, it's too late. Anybody that really understands then why all philosophy is too late. Anything can be asked for is too late. Anything that you can ask, well, if man da-da-da-da-da-da, and the forces are da-da-da-da-da-da, then why is it that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da? Why is it that we cannot da-da-da-da-da-da? Why is it that humanity seems intent upon da-da-da-da-da-da? Once you understand that when you're a dimension short, you're a day late, you understand that all philosophy, all parole questions, all verbalized inquiries, all yellow circuit investigations are always a day late. Always. Therefore, they can satisfy no one except those who either are still riding, not in the back of the bus, but they're hanging on to the bumper, or else those who got off to stop past and they didn't realize it. Now, they're the ones that will hold up a book or to say, yes, I am within days of having my PhD in philosophy. I'm within days of having a real thought. Had this bus had a bathroom, I would have had a great thought even before now. As a kid here, I was going to ask whether he thought I had gotten off too obliquely, whether this was enough of that strange weirdness for one night, and whether she'd go into real things about, well, I have a question here. If someone wants to know, how should I deal with my boss? We should really be asking, or I should be asking you again, even if it's on these public tapes, which I point out to you public tape watchers at some other time in some other place. I cannot do all of this. I'm aware the camera's on. I don't look at it. I don't address much to you, but here it is one more time. I am not, or I cannot, take your choice, doing these for history, for posterity. They're trying to make everything seem timeless. I consider doing that, and it can't be done. And if it could be done, I'm not going to do it. But such things, keep all that in mind, if you will. As everyone should be asking themselves in some way, asking yourself, now it's back, you know, your hand's back in this dark croaker sack wherein the city and all the people are. That's the asking yourself. You're trying to take the lay of the land, topography, not just limited to the mathematical definition, but you're trying to get the feel of life's body, its head, its bumps, to feel its nervous system operating. On that basis is where I try to drag you sometimes, which is the last few minutes, is what in the world is there to be said? And that's not anti-intellectualism, as all of you know. It's not it's not any form of pessimism or fatalism. It's no form of any ism. But all of the questions, all the important questions, all the mystical questions, all the philosophical questions, all the very questions that you think brought you here. You think that those very questions were put into your soul and they've been burning bright, or at least they've been smoldering all these years, just waiting for some great guru to pop out, something in life to happen, to really ignite the flame and to set you afire, to launch you off where you could really get above the crowd and study all the problems, be touched with a certain amount of mystical insight, be able to, at least to some large segment of the public, try and get them to see, all right, if God is omnipotent and God is, and I'll at least satisfy some of you people. I'll get some new interpretation. I'll get some new flash of insight, and I'll become the New Age, fill in the blank. The New Age, Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Martin Luther, John. There's a way in which by now that some of you should be able to feel that anything that can be asked is not worthy of being asked. Anything that can be asked, if it had any validity, it has no answer. Not on the basis of using the same words, the same descriptions, the same letters, the same breath that was involved with asking the question, because you are a dimension short. When you're attempting, which in a sense everyone starts out doing, in a sense you still are. You believe that I'm helping by the nights we meet. But when you're attempting to measure, to plot, to diagnose, to navigate, to understand life, which for everybody in the beginning is, of course, life in the city. That's where we were all born. In your attempts to do all of that, what people cannot remember, even if they got a quick glimpse of it, they cannot remember that all of the abilities, all of your present mathematical, navigational skills and knowledge were gained in the city. That's where it all came from. Everything that you brought with you into this, you got in the city. All of your skills, all of the knowledge was native to the city. And so now, here you are attempting to get out away from the city. Not only my two-dimensional little drawings of circles and bushes, but you're attempting to get out of it three-dimensionally. And once you understand it, you're attempting to escape from it four-dimensionally. So you're attempting to launch yourself away from this, but to do so, you got to make plans. Somebody's got to tell you about it. Everybody suspects it. At least everybody gets involved with this. You suspected they're somewhere else. So then you meet somebody that apparently knows they're somewhere else. So then you got to plot in some way, because you tried it other ways. You tried drugs, you tried reading it in a book, you tried just whatever crossed your mind, and none of it worked. And so now apparently you need information. You've got to plot, you've got to have some notion about how to navigate should I begin to escape from this present position. But people cannot realize, they don't see the connection with this, and it's not your fault. It's one of the first order, as I said, moments of amazement. I normally describe it to you as those times when it suddenly strikes you that I think the same things over and over and over. And I never actually realized the full dimension of this. That I kept straining and thinking I had to read more, I had to hear him talk more, I had to put all this together more and more. And it's just absolute amazement the first few times you see it. That I have been inside of a lead-lined small little box, and I kept thinking I was pushing the walls out. I thought the walls were about to fall apart, or that I was on my tiptoes and I was about to pop the ceiling up. And I believed that I was getting new views of this whole thing, and you weren't. And that's what I'm intending to point out to you from a slightly different other direction tonight, is no one realizes that every apparent skill, every piece of knowledge you got up before this, you got in the city. Now back in the city, there's only two ways to study things, and that's real up close or things real far away. You can either study the stars in the heavens, or you can apparently study the hairs in your neighbor's nose. Apparently you can study the cell patterns on white mice. But you got to understand everybody's living in each other's face. everything in the city is in everything else's face. Everything is jammed up. It is why there is no such thing, if you want me to throw it in again, as a peripheral matter, there is no such thing really as psychology. There never has been. Because it's impossible in the city. In the city, all you can do is study things real up close with a microscope, as it were. Or you can study things real far off with telescopes. But the city has no real knowledge of itself. To have any knowledge of itself, it would have to put some distance from itself. The city has no clinical knowledge. In fact, what would even pass for theoretical knowledge really belongs more within the area of roto-rooters than it does useful knowledge. But where the city, in skills and knowledge, can seem to excel is in matters up close. This is literal, this is figurative. In matters far away. But the city itself, the people, have no real view of themselves. They cannot. To do so, they would have to get out of the city. The city itself would have to get away from itself and then look. It has what amounts to piecemeal knowledge. It has knowledge of its immediate neighborhood. One neighborhood has knowledge of an adjoining neighborhood. One person has apparent knowledge of an adjoining person. This is what should be called. If it's going to be called psychology, they should be more specific and call it is the study of immediate behavior. It's a study of my neighbor's behavior. But no one can put it together. There is no systematic view of the city. The city cannot describe itself. No one can sing the praises. No one can become a paid booster or a free booster for Houston unless they get out of Houston, unless there is some contrast, unless they try and sell the young chiropractors of America to coming to Houston instead of Dallas. They've got to get outside of Houston to say something. The only way that anyone can promote anything is by contrast. The city cannot get away from itself. It does not know what to say. It makes comments about the behavior of my immediate neighbor. It may make apparent comments about the reputed behavior of some people on the other side of the city in neighborhoods in which I have never been. And physically, that person may have been through there and didn't even know it because it was too foreign. It has to be right up here, has to be real close, or it has to be real far away. They can study the stars, and they can study cell growths from their neighbor's nose. Now, that's simply the way it is in the city. To get the needed view, to pick up any new information, you have got to be able to put distance between you and the city. But now you're back. Let me remind you, all of the known methods, supposed methods of even how to get out of the city, were gained in the city. Therefore, they do not work. That is why everything that men ordinarily try, from drugs to chanting to pursuing a so-called religion, to pursuing something that some body or some group of bodies say, hey, one time this worked. Be that as it may, it does not work now. The would-be revolutionist himself has got to find some way to distance himself. He has got to be able to get away from the city to get any view of it. And there is no information in the city. It has to do, if you want it this crudely, it's not incorrectly, but if you want this crudely, it has to do with a kind of self-protection of the city. That the city has got to keep a certain three-dimensional ignorance of itself. The city has got to, from another view, keep the people itself, which is the city. Remember, there is no church. It's people. There is no institution of the press. It's the people. There is no such thing as Houston, as Dallas. There is the people. So from another view, if you want it this way verbally, the city has got to keep its constituents, the parts that make it up. That is, the people itself has got to keep them ignorant of what the city is. to survive. It is a kind of self-protection on this level. But a few people who would understand something extraordinary, something useless, they have got to be able to put some distance between them and the city. It's not fly way away, away, millions of light years away, because they'd have no better view. And it's not to get any closer. You don't need to be any closer. The idea that I could study psychology and someday this will finally open up my understanding of what human nature is about. If you got any basis of being a revolutionist, I don't have to even apparently attack psychology. You've simply got to see that psychology, among other things, is not interested in what I'm interested in. It sounds like it is, but it's not. If that sort of study would do anything, you wouldn't have to go to school. How would you go in school and study rats, study statistics? You would go out and sit down on your front stoop and you would look at people. Or you'd go out in the marketplace and you would just study people. Or you'd take your own family, your mother and father and your siblings, and you would study them. And then if everybody left the house except you, you'd try to, you'd study you. To those of you with any potential revolutionary consciousness, you do know that that's not an attack, that's not being sarcastic. The only reason you giggle is, it's weird, but that's true. That apparently, from all ordinary views, you can't learn anything about people by looking at them. You can't find out anything about human life by studying it. Nothing. You've been here in the middle of it 30 or 40 years, whether you majored in psychology or not. You've been looking at people, they've been looking at you, everybody's looking at each other. Everyone is commenting upon each other's behavior. People comment on behavior that happened 2,000 years ago, they weren't even here. People are commenting on everything. People are taking down statistics. There are questionnaires everywhere you turn, wanting to know what foods do you eat, which ones do you like, what do you watch on TV. I assume there are enough statistics now to choke Mr. Roper, Masters and Johnson. There's enough statistics to prove anything. And yet you understand that has not worked. You've had all these years to look at everything, and it didn't tell you a damn thing. It's because there is no distance. It's because all of the skills, all the apparent knowledge that one has, one got in the city. In the city, the ruling powers are going to control speech. They're going to control information. That's the only way they keep control. The only way that they dictate what apparently is reality to the people is to control the language, control the thought. But if they control the language, that you keep thinking the same things over and over, even though it apparently changes from neighborhood to neighborhood, there is this commonly held conception of reality that everyone in the city has. That is, all humans have. And as long as that is your perception, as long as you can't think outside those terms, outside those categories, as long as you can't think outside them, then if there is somebody in charge of doing this, if there were, then they've got you. As long as they can control the language, they control the people's sense of reality. Now, of course, we're not talking about conspiracies and we're not talking about political power. We're talking about what seems to be your individual nervous system, the way in which it apparently maps, accepts, tries to diagnose its experience. That is, its reality. But the diagnosis is the same day after day, generation after generation. And if you were a doctor trying to diagnose the reality, that is, trying to diagnose your experience, that I am going to understand something. Everybody else, they're living and dying and nobody seems to care. I'm interested. I'm extremely curious, and I believe that, in fact, I have a potential ability to perceive things that the average person doesn't have. So I'm going to study this matter. You can study all you want to. You can attempt to diagnose your own experience. But every diagnostic tool you have, every piece of information that you have that seems to be the least bit pertinent to understanding the human condition, you got in the city. The ruling powers gave you. It's available. You just think, if you're ordinary, that you're extraordinary. And everyone keeps thinking, where is the missing piece? What is the missing secret that I don't have? You cannot navigate, you cannot plot, you cannot diagnose the city based upon the skills and the knowledge that the city has made available to you. It would be self-defeating. The city would be giving away the mysteries of its fortifications. It would be revealing the life force that keeps the city as being a separate entity. It would be a kind of slow suicide for the city. It does not give out such information. It's not available. Right outside the city, there are parts of life's body, if you want to look at it as being a spatial matter outside, or if you want to see it as being a timely matter. There is, when you add another dimension, there are other areas of life's body that has some distance, which is, of course, synonymous with time for you three-dimensional brain thinkers. But to be able to put some distance between you and your homeland, between you and the very place that you learned all of your skills and all of your knowledge, the very place that all of your experience sprang from, with a certain kind of distance. It's not just intellectual perception. It's not limited to the five senses. But it's as though you can get a feel for what's going on, and the skill that you're using is not limited to that which is available in the city. And what you now know is no thanks to the ruling powers. It's no thanks to your neighbors. Perhaps a little more about contrast. Some more consistent ideas come questions throughout man's history. Why is it that continually reason has been referred to in such manners as being the enemy of faith, or that thought is the foe of feeling? Why is it that the apparent upstart offspring so distrusts, even despises his progenitor? How can a kid so hate his father as to claim that reason is the enemy of faith, that thought is the foe of feeling? Could it be that there are forms approaching the supreme contrast, the 3D contrast in life's body, such as the older versus the newer, the higher versus the lower, the chemical versus the electrical? There is a tacit ban in the city. And the ban is on absolute info, full disclosure of data. There is a tacit, unknown, undiagnosed, unrecognized ban in effect. Always has been, always will be. It is on this basis, from another view, that I point out to you, this is no astounding observation on my part, because in the city they're aware of this. They look at it as being a logical, linear extension of human progress, as it may be. That is the continuing specialization, the continuing isolation of knowledge. The specialization in the fact that you are down to the fact, the more that you seem to know in the city, of not only becoming an expert in the cell structure of your neighbor's nose, but then you've got to become, if you're going to get a reputation, the specialization in the fact that you are down to the fact, the more that you seem to know in the city, of not only becoming an expert in the cell structure of your neighbor's nose, but then you've got to become, if you're going to get a reputation after that, you understand, it's got to be that you are now a cellular specialist in noses of such and such magnitude. And it has to become further and further specialized. If on the other extreme you were now a specialist in some aspect of astronomy, the far away, then you have got to more and more localize, specialize in that faraway area where your abilities are. That is a kind of tacit ban on absolute info. It is an unrecognized admission that human consciousness is not going to get outside the real close or the real far away. I don't have any, assuming that I in some way am thinking at least a split second ahead of my tongue, I do not, as I'm about to say this, have any intention or any plans of going much further with this, but I could say that the revolutionist, in a sense, is a four-dimensional generalist. And that if really pressed, it might turn out that a real revolutionist wouldn't be an expert in anything, for all I know. But at least if any of you get concerned about that, let me point out that that which seems to be of some specific interest in the 3D world, the kind of things that people specialize in, I guess I should point out to you, if you hadn't figured it out, only having, in some cases, some of you have only had 30 and 40 years, but in case you hadn't figured out, being an expert in something back in the city doesn't really mean squat. If it did, then of course we would all be handed a new, improved nervous system along with your master's degree. When they admitted you into the Bricklayers Union, they would have given you something in addition to that. There is a kind of ban, of course I'm really playing with words to talk about absolute knowledge, but in the city the relative view of it would be that there is a ban on absolute knowledge, that you cannot have any view of what the city is. You cannot have anything even approaching a unified perception of how the neighborhoods are tied together, what relationship one profession has to another, what relationship one institution has to another, how an institution is nothing but people, how people are nothing but institutions, how the molecular structure of one man's nose is irrevocably tied to the rise and fall of the precious metals inside the marketplace of the city. That would be a kind, relatively speaking, that would be a kind of absolute knowledge, absolute info, because it would begin to explain something about the nature of the city. And that information is forbidden. The city does not even have that info in itself. For those of you who, if anybody really ever goes back and looks at this tonight and follows any of it, to be more specific for those of you that would like to at least push on one of the 3D walls a little bit, I could say it's not just that the information is forbidden to even the city itself, but it's that any part of the city, including the city itself, cannot have a present knowledge of itself that it may have already had. That is, it may not appear to be just a matter of putting distance between you and the city to have a view of it, but there has to be the matter of time between you and the city. In other words, that which the city already knows about itself, you can't know. That which the city already knows about itself, it doesn't know it knows on the 3D level. Because once you cut a dimension off, you're a day short. If it goes from, if I said, for a matter of fact, that on a 4D level the city knows what it is, then within a 4D reality, of course, is a 3D world. And if we go down to the 3D world, then we're back to where the city does not know what it is. Or the information is incomplete. That is, there is no absolute info available on itself. If you're up too close to yourself, your dimension's short. If you're too far away from yourself, if you are attempting to study man, not just as white mice, not just as the behavior of your immediate neighbor, but if you were attempting to study man on the basis that was almost into another galaxy, that is, study man historically, study man theoretically, you're still no closer. And what would appear to be absolute info, that is, info that would disclose something, is forbidden. It's not available. How about a few other, as strange as I drug you around tonight, I don't guess I'll try to go anywhere specific with this. What if you were trying to read the lumps on the city's head? What if you were attempting to lay city on one of those chiropractic benches and push its muscles around and try to feel its spine and try to make some sense out of it? How about a few other kind of forbidden questions? Of course, they're not forbidden, they're just questions that have no validity in the 3D city. No one can say that there is any possible pertinence. But let me ask you some things like this. Whatever this is, me staying here making these tapes, you showing up and watching the tapes, seeing me personally, trying to listen to this, take notes, that has some meaning, that's going somewhere, that it's revealing piece by piece little bits of some unknown universe, that it's secret knowledge. Try and take a wider view. Imagine that you could get yourself outside the city, get up in a hot air balloon, and don't expect me to finish all the hot air. But if you could get above the city, put some distance, and you could look, not at you, not at your neighbor, not at your life, that you could actually get away from the city and see it from a view that you've never had, then was just some questions I could ask you. Having to do with the navigation, the plotting, the diagnosis of the city itself. What is going on in the city? The city being human life within the life of life. If you could then break out of the limitations of the language that the ruling powers in the city have placed upon you, you could then attempt to ask non-verbally questions like, what is it that man apparently in the city wants solved? But now you got to get outside all the categories, not come up with the answers, not come up with the apparent areas that the city's already taught you, like, well, life, what man really wants to know is what's the purpose of life. Give me a you-know-what. You boy and girl geniuses. Well, it's surely that men want to know what is the purpose of life, or that some men want to know, is there life after death? Or are you up to date? There is no pulling the wool over your eyes. I'm saying if you were freed in some way from those limitations, you and everyone else has asked those questions. Not just simply Descartes. The baker down the street's asked that question sometimes. Your crazy Uncle Elmer's asked that question. But I'm asking you, what is it, if you could free yourself from the current limitations, if you understood how you were imprisoned in the limitations, what then might you respond? By feel, not by word. Of what is it that men really want solved? What so-called religious promises have always been made that if you could get freed, if you could get some distance between you and the present city as it is now, which would put you in a different time zone, what apparent religious promises have always been made that actually are now irrelevant, but humanity hadn't caught up with it as a whole, that the city as a whole still claims to have certain interests, certain concerns, and they don't really. You got to remember, time zones, distance, that I can say that one thing is true and yet it's not true. That in the city they still have a concern over religious promises that have been fed to the city. But what's true in New York at one time, somebody can look at their watch and say, it is 12 o'clock. And by phone somebody from Sacramento can say, no, it is not 12 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock. And they're both true. There are parts of the city that I was speaking of the city as a whole, that still apparently believe that they are relying on, that they have an interest in, that they're concerned over promises that seem to have come from the institutions of religion. Explanations, diagnoses, ways to navigate, and then promises of what may happen to man here, what may happen to him later. And they are irrelevant. That if you can get into another time zone, if you could distance yourself correctly from the city in toto, a more up-to-date description would be that people have no interest anymore. And yet you get back in the city up real close, and apparently they do. Apparently you do. You could ask from a certain distance from the city, what is it that the people, men and women, what is it that they want to think? What is it that they want to feel? What is it that they want to do? What is it that the people want? Do they want knowledge? Do they want hope? Do they want relief? Or do they want fun? If you could feel the topography of the city, you should have such questions, non-verbally, and you can't have the question based upon the kind of skill and apparent investigative knowledge that you picked up in the city. It's got to be some other kind, or you'll still get the same answers over and over, or else you'll apparently run into the same dead ends over and over. But look upon life. If you get far enough away from the city, you could look down Broadway. You could look down Melrose. You could look down Peachtree Street. You could look at the entertainment page spread through time in every city. You look through the business section of the phone book, the yellow pages spread in all possible directions in all cities, and ask yourself, apparently in the city, what is it that humans want? When you go down Broadway, when you drive down Santa Monica and you go 20 miles looking, would it help to stop and do a statistical listing about, all right, how many places do I pass that are in charge of putting something in your mouth? How many places are just restaurants? How many places just serve booze? How many bars? How many places are movies? How many places are theaters? Then how many places are there to fix your car? How many places are there that I pass that teach ballroom dancing? Do all of these fit into one of the four categories I just made up? That they either offer knowledge, hope, relief, or fun? Was that it? How many categories, if any of you got any question with that, how many categories would it take to handle all the possibilities? What I was trying to drag your attention toward, forget any metaphysical potential basis for this, just everybody in the city. What is it that they seem to get up every day and want? What is it that seems to be able to get them through this dragged out 60 or 70 years here on this planet without them going nuts or turning into out-and-out alcoholics or drug addicts? What is it when they get through working that they apparently will sit down and look in the paper or ask somebody or just go out driving that they want to do? Or if you ask them, if you were now a millionaire and you didn't have to work, what would you do? Well, right now you don't have to work, you're off work and you got money in your pocket and you pay all your bills, yeah. What can we do tonight? What can we do for this weekend? Do we go to church? Do we go and try to pick up girls? Do we go and try to pick up men? Do we go and try and improve our skill in a sport? Do we go out and sit down to be passively entertained? Do we go out and sit down not to be just entertained, but perhaps entertained and informed? Do I want to go and spend my weekend sitting on a grease rack in an automobile repair shop? Do I want to go sit in a theater? Do I want to go sit in a ballet? Do I want to go and sit in a church? Do I want to go out and do something? Do I want to go dance? Do I want to go bowl? Do I want to go drive my car real fast? Do I want to go and pay and watch somebody else drive their car real fast? I'm telling you, in the topography of life in the city, there are a limited number of categories that all of this will fit in. I just threw out four of apparently trying to get new knowledge, which would include skill, to get relief, to get hope, the promise of hope, the appearance of hope, or to be entertained, fun. Why do people go out? If you got down and studied the calendars in the paper in all the cities that list 2,000 things to do this week, and they list everything from the Sacramento Flower Lovers Association to the Secaucus Library Association to the Atlanta Ballroom Dancers Club to the Coconut Grove chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous. You look down. Would it help to try and make up a statistical report? Would you learn anything? What if you went around and you spent a long time going to all of these meetings and you took down numbers? How many people go to a literary meeting? How many people go to Alcoholics Anonymous? How many people are in church as opposed to how many people are out dancing in a nightclub? Would that tell you anything? If you had any distance from the city, could you see it differently? What is it that you thought this would be? What is it you still think you want from this? Do you want knowledge? Do you want hope? Do you want some kind of relief? Do you want fun? If that sounded too obscure, what is it that I am apparently offering that you seem to get at times? Am I offering knowledge? Does this offer some hope? Does it offer relief? Or is it fun? Is it entertaining? And is there another category? Is there something else that humans apparently want and do that won't fit into one of those four categories? Do you believe there's ever been any human activity that would not fit into those categories? Like religion, that kind of shit. That in some way that won't fit. Philosophical curiosity. A burning feel for the problems of humanity. There is a certain way in which I can state again for you quite distinctly that is really without any three-dimensional English on it. It has no particular spin on it, although verbally your molecules are going to, your hearing molecules will take it in ways that will obviously have some inference connotation on it. That's what hearing molecules do. They must contrast. Or you couldn't pick out one sound from another. You couldn't hear me make these sounds coming from my mouth that would override sounds coming from the air conditioner, from traffic outside. But be that as it may, I can point out to you that only the pushy are free. That a kind of update to some of the things I have said and some of the things that I have allowed Kairoot to send to you, I can give you a slight update, is to say that the nature of things is push or be pushed. It all has to do with an unconditional, once you understand it, looking out for oneself. That you have got to turn your energy efficiently to feeding whatever it is, if this is what you should be doing. If you now have no doubt that you were born to do this, and no matter how it's described, no matter whatever happened, that this is it, past any form of discussion or doubt, then there is an extreme matter of efficiency wherein everything must be directed toward feeding you. And this cannot be done if you are pushed. If you are going to be a pushy, you are not doing this. At any time you are being pushed, you are not free. Anytime you're being pushed, you're not operating efficiently. Anytime you're being pushed, you're back playing city games. It may appear to be as innocuous as hopscotch or tag, or it may appear to be as seriously as being mugged. But if you are being pushed, you're not doing this. If you're being pushed, you are not looking out for your own revolutionary interest. A part of the ban on absolute info back in the city keeps one from looking after oneself on this basis. But it would apparently manifest itself imperfectly. But it would apparently manifest itself in the myriad amount of connections, interpersonal relations between you, your family, your acquaintances, your past friends, the people in the city, your neighborhood, your race, your religion, your sex. It is the inescapable common denominator of the genetic kinship of all of us, that you just apparently live in a particular section of the city, in a particular neighborhood. There is a genetic kinship between everyone. That's why I said that the absolute self-centered selfishness, as it sounds verbally, is a true imperfect reflection. That's not even possible. But even if it were possible, in a way that it strikes you verbally perhaps, it would still do no one else any harm, because it is still life looking after itself. But a would-be revolutionist cannot spend time inefficiently. That is, by doing the very slack, the very imprecise, the very conflicting dreams that life has within its own nervous system of, well, I should be over here helping some other part of town. My concern should be, what do those other people in the other sections of town think about me? What do they think about me when they find out I did not show up to help them? What do they think about me when I do not show up in the parades? What happens when they find that my name is not on the list of contributors? When there seems to be this invisible election that I sense that keeps going on, that they won't know who's concerned, I believe that some way they figured out that I don't even raise my hand when it's in my pocket. And it is wired into the genetic code of humanity to feel otherwise. That in general in the city is that we're all in this together. I come first, but we're all in this together. And the revolutionary knows differently. That everyone else thinks we're all in this together, but they don't know it. And some of them believe that they are self-centered, and they're not. That he can see from some distance that the city is not unknown for people to jump up, put on little funny hats, and jump up on a fire hydrant and grab a broomstick and wave it like a sword and holler, "It's every man for himself, I'm captain of my fate. To hell with all you minions, get out of my way." Children do that. Sometimes grown-ups do that. Sometimes life does that to itself. But the revolutionist knows that if anybody asks any question, if anybody has any question about how should I treat my mother, how should I treat my best friend, what should be my attitude about this particular part of the city, what should be my attitude toward humanity, what should be my attitude toward the gods, if anybody's got to ask the questions about, well, now, how should I feel about so-and-so, there is no satisfactory answer. And those who ask can never be satisfied. There is no question that is pressing upon your soul, that is heavy upon your little heart, that has ever been satisfactorily answered, nor can it ever be. I cannot do it, no one can do it. The questions that the city places in men's minds and on their souls are not really questions. They're two-thirds of a damn question. And so even if you get an answer, you got two-thirds of an answer. Or you got an answer, if you want another way that was appropriate, for a question made up, that took up X volume, and you start out with two-thirds X. And so the question comes back, and it does not seem to be, or the answer comes back, and it does not seem to be absolutely appropriate for what was your original field of inquiry. I've been told too much. I've been told much that seems to be superfluous. If there's anything you're still wondering about, yeah. If there's anything that you're still concerned about, I don't blame you. Anything you're still worried about, yeah. Anything that you still want to discuss, right on, right on. Let me at least try to stabilize some of this toward the end. Let's be scientific. Since this is on the covers of magazines, superconductivity. There's a way in which the revolutionist has got to create his own kind of condition of a certain kind of superconductivity, but it has to do with being able to facilitate less wasteful, more efficient, less inhibited chemical flows. Without it, you can't get past the ban on absolute info. Without it, you cannot look after yourself in a way in which I'm referring that is necessary out in the bushes. Once you begin to get away from the gravitational hold, the gravitational safety of the city. You know, back in the city, from one view, as all of you know, everybody's nuts. Except back in the city, relatively speaking, you can't tell it. Everything seems all right. But when you get away from it, it's then for the first time you can begin to think, hey, I'm about to float away. I'm about to fly up Mary Poppins' dress and hurt myself. It's just a way in which that you have to be able to use what is ordinarily referred to as the emotions, the chemical flow. There's a kind of controlled aggression that is self-protection. I could have given it a slightly softening preface perhaps and started that part out and say that you have to learn how to take that kind of chemical flow, and it's as though you almost have to attack train those kind of emotions, but not neuter them. You can't declaw them. Now in the city, if it were possible, that's what the religions are talking about. That's what that part of life's own nervous system in man seems to be condemning. That there are parts of the human nervous system that will do things that will fly into the absolute face of progress. Your forefathers would believe would fly into the face of the gods. You cannot control the things that must be controlled if you're having to put up with the ordinary amount of resistance. That's what I meant, that there has to be a kind of superconductivity. You cannot use, I'm just going here with the term aggression, you cannot use it, you cannot control it as long as it has the ordinary resistance. As long as you have got the acquired resistance that's taught in the city, you cannot control it. It's unpredictable. Of course, that's a three-dimensional lie right there. It's very predictable, but to you it seems unpredictable. The inhibitions, the mechanical resistance to that kind of chemical flow makes it apparently uncontrollable, that you can get too mad. You get mad when it's not profitable. Ordinary aggression, the uncontrolled aggression, is in no way self-protective. It's just simply other noise and fumes in the city. It's very mechanical. It is very inspecific chemical uprisings in the lab. But if you know how to use it, then the very things that seem to be condemnable in all the religions and all the so-called metaphysical systems become something to use. They become something that are necessary weapons. You cannot, in the 3D world, humble your way anywhere. You cannot whine your way into anything. You cannot crawl your way to anything. You cannot hair shirt your way into it. You can't plead your way into it. It's questionable, and as if it is getting anywhere, I assure you that you cannot back your way into it. Well, if that didn't stabilize enough, I'll try one more time before we stop the tape. How about something very specific? Is that everyone should be doing this. You should take at the lab level, at the chemical level, that all of you should be doing only those things that would seem to make the revolutionary sense of yourself, your revolutionary eye. You should only do those things that make it feel good. Whatever that is. You should eat those foods. We're talking about not your acquired habits in the city, not everyone's habits, but you should only eat those foods that make the revolutionists feel good. You should only drink those things. You should do the kind of physical exercises that make the revolutionist feel good. If the revolutionist feels good weighing X pounds, you should weigh that. If he feels better losing X number of pounds, lose them. If it feels better putting on some weight, put it on. If the revolutionist feels better getting 10 hours sleep, get it. If he feels better, you find out on 4 hours, get it. If you're not going to look after the revolutionist, who is? The city's not. Your mother's not. Your father's not. Your brother's not. Your mate is not. And all of the people in you are indifferent. If you keep waiting that in some way you're going to miraculously pull yourself together, or worse yet, that miraculously you're suddenly going to come together and know what to do, you already know what to do, or you don't belong here. You know what to do on the area of making yourself chemically feel good. If you will continue, if that was, you still feel if I'm being too obtuse tonight, if you will continue to eat a pizza at 11, 12 o'clock at night, and it has, the next morning when you get up, the chemical lab is operating in such a way that its children, your yellow circuit activity, may wring its hands, may wonder why it is that I am not as happy today as I am happy sometimes. Like once a month, it seems miraculously I wake up and I just want to say, life, thanks a lot. Gee whiz. I feel so happy that I know I'm unworthy and I know something terrible is going to happen. I'm probably going to die today and all that. And you know for a fact, for a non-city fact, that there is a connection between you eating a pizza after 11 o'clock at night and the way you think the next day. Ordinary people never know this. Never know this. And don't get too cocky and think, well, hell, anybody knows that. No, you don't. If you knew that, you would be miraculous. You can say you know it once I bring it up. You can say you know it once you bring it up. You can say you know it, whatever brings it up. And you go, oh, yeah, I knew that. Hell, everybody knows that. Everybody knows everything. One thing at a time. The offshoot, the Medusa progeny from the head of the chemical lab, does not know how can I make myself think in nice, pleasant ways every day. And carried further, I'm sure some of you were involved with before, why is it that I cannot read a book on self-hypnosis? Why is it that I can't get tapes that say that you can play them at night, or you play them while you're running? And it says over and over, I'm getting smarter and smarter. I will be happy every day. Well, hell, you even said something like that. I'm going to get up every morning, I'm going to run into the mirror, I'm going to say, boy, am I happy, boy, am I happy. I'm the happiest person in the world. How come that don't work? Well, I've already asked you. Do you believe? Are you still going to believe, like they do in the city, that you can run into the lab and holler, naughty chemicals, bad boys? Do you believe that you're going to get a job as the fire chief in the city and you're going to run out to flames and say, tut, tut, tut? Of course, perhaps in the city you might appear to be a more aggressive fire chief. And you might say, no, down, 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 down. Yeah. People believe, not just in subliminal tapes, but it has been around forever. Such phrases as a man thinketh, so he is. Now, if that's true, that is all we need is subliminal tapes. Or bliminal tapes. All you need to do is change the way you think, right? All you got to do is take control of how you think. is every morning get up and refuse to think bad thoughts. Do it. Do it, do it. Do it, mama. Just refuse. And if you have any trouble, I don't see why you have to spend $200 or $300 on those tapes. Just make your own tape that says over and over, I will not think sad thoughts. I will not think that. And play it all night while you're asleep. Put in your little Walkman when you get in the morning to run. And then just watch the miraculous results. Of course, the funny part is, to a real revolutionist, to a recruit would be, you know, you're right. Why the fuck doesn't it work? In the 3D world, tracks run in one direction, certain parts of the city. Trains go in certain directions. They go off and they do not come back on that track. There are chemical explosions that can do in the chemist. But I submit to you that there is no way to reverse that and for the chemist to run inside and to verbally, or if you want this, through the power of his intellect, to stare down the flames. There are certain trains that only go in one direction. There are certain flows of energy that only run one way. In the 3D world, that is. As a man thinketh, so he is. I don't know, I'm saying this, I'm being sort of melodramatic, theatrical now. I don't know what kind of laugh life had to itself when it thought of that and then put it into the city and man. I fear to think what kind of perverse mood life was in that came up with the term, as a man thinketh, so he is. And imagine what kind of drugs or alcohol life was on at the time. That not only was that bad enough, it went, hey, and it took this and it threw it down into the city, down where man was, and had another laugh. And then I guess forgot about it. As a man thinketh, so he is. God Almighty, there's the key. There is the secret. That's it. There's no doubt about it. That's it. I've discovered it. Of course, the Greeks discovered it, and the Buddhists discovered it. But now I have discovered it. As a man thinketh, so he is. There's no doubt about it. That's what all this is about. All I've got to do is stop thinking the same old crap. First off, stop thinking all the sad stuff. Well, stop thinking all the angry stuff. I get up in the morning and there's no particular reason I get up and I'm hating my boss. I'm hating my neighbor. And if nobody particular comes to mind, I just get up feeling just kind of tense. I'm going to stop that. That's all I got to do. I'll just stop it. Well, be sure and right. Why is it not that simple? Because you're not being good to yourself. Because you won't look after number one. It's because you believe that anything that runs on the track in that direction in the 3D world will eventually come back on that track. You believe, whether you know it or not, that there is such a thing as psychology. You believe that, well, I'm some sort of all wound up, I'm a big ball of confusion. But it got wound up, and all I've got to do is unwind it. And I'll get back to a pristine state wherein I was just a simple little unadorned piece of string, laid out nice and straight, with a beginning and an end, instead of being all wound up in this ball of aggressive, confused confusion. If it got wound up, it can be unwound. If the train went this way, I don't care what they say, I'll stand right here, and the son of a gun has got to come back. Man invented this laboratory. Man discovered these chemicals. And I'll take my little whip in there, I'll take them in my stern voice and perhaps some photocopies of my degrees, and I will flash them on these chemicals. I don't know who this lab believes it is anyway. Is a man going to be outdone by pepperoni? Is a man of my caliber going to be done in by 3 kinds of cheeses? Well, of course, it's nice to hear that hearty laughter for you people to realize, well, no, this is a much more complex and serious matter than all that. We're dealing with some kind of wrestling of great forces of good and evil over my soul, not mozzarella. Right. Well, you got to admit this. You don't have to, but somebody will make you sooner or later. Every now and then, at least I've done it in the last year, I point out to you that once you find out, once you get a real glimpse of what this is all about, you're going to die. You're just going to die. I'm just glad I won't be around. That's one of the nice ways this works, is that people like me is never around if any of the other people that they fool with ever see it. Which I can point out to you may be a good thing. Life may know what it's doing. That's why evidently they don't have 2 people see it at the same extreme at any particular time on this planet, or at least in the same neighborhood. Because once you get a glimpse, you're just going to die. And I think that at that time, if that happens, you'll appreciate my descriptions. I thought about it a long time. But that about covers it. You're just going to die. All right, one last thing. I was talking about love last time we met. Point another curious thing that happens in the city. Relationships between people. There is a kind of dual relationship that has never been analyzed. And it's the few minutes I got, I'll just say 1 or 2 things, and some of you might get something from this, apparently having to do with the city. Those of you that still apparently dealing with city problems. As much as I laugh at them and scoff at them, they still become parallel struggles as long as you don't get drowned in them. But back in the city, there seems to be what amounts to a dual relationship between people. Two different relationships that people ordinarily have. And the first one is that one person apparently feels a particular way about another person in their presence. But then there's this second one. That's the way that a person apparently feels about another person. That's their memory feeling of them. By memory feel, it does not take a great expanse of horizontal time. I just mean the difference in the person that you think you love being here and you're with them, and now they're off at work or you're off at work, and you think about them. They're no longer at that time in your presence. And what people do not realize, what is not taken into account, that in many instances, one of these would appear to be, let us call it a positive feel. And the other one can be, relatively speaking, a negative feel about the same person. And the only difference seems to be that you're either in their presence or they're in your presence or otherwise. And it's like two separate relationships. But when I'm in their presence, we're together, I apparently feel one way, but all I got to do just about is get in the car and go to the store and be gone 5 or 10 minutes, just maybe in another room if you can follow this. And then it's what appears to be your memory. You're thinking of them. And one of them can apparently be in direct conflict with the other, and it goes undiagnosed. It can produce a kind of noxious situation. It's all right in the city. It's nothing unusual. But you should suspect that if you find some validity in you in your kind of relationships, this is the kind of thing into which one should look. It may be the kind of thing between which one should put some distance. But just on what would appear to be the verbal, logical basis, you should see that there is something very curious, very sticky, if not stinky. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that this is some exotic state of affairs that only occurs, statistically speaking, in 1 out of every 10 billion affairs and relationships. If it didn't have any widespread pertinence, I wouldn't mention it. Just look. In relationships, I say love, it can even be kin. It can be your parents. But probably the first place to see it is what appears to be your relationship, your sensual, your sexual, your love relationship with another person, is to find out that there amounts to very specific potential in everybody, in every relationship. A great potential for this to be true that amounts to 2 separate relationships going on. Everything in total, not just the way that you think you're thinking, the whole relationship. I just used an easy way to get you started, that apparently you have one feeling when you and the person are there together. Then if you can see this, if you're good enough to spot it, they can say, excuse me, man, I got to go in the kitchen and look at the roast. I got to go to the bathroom. And they go out of the room, and let's assume that you're still apparently thinking about them. Oh, isn't she sweet? Isn't he a wonderful person? And he simply leaves the room, or she does, and then you go into the second mode. And the 2 can be, as far as possible, they can be apparently in diametric opposition. That one of them can apparently be a positive feel toward the person, and the other one be a negative one. And then switch right back when they come back in the room. Don't tell me you don't find out unusual psychological facts and theories here. Let's put it another way. Don't tell me that you don't get the underbelly of the city, the hidden areas behind the fences and the sewers of the city plotted here that nobody else would even think to look into. Well, having successfully now landed us on a place that is quite solid, pretty mundane, brought you all back down to earth. Everybody's back in their reasonable, sensual mode of understanding where you are, being able to orient yourself, spot the wind, know north from south, know that God's still on his throne and all's right with the world. And if the Republicans are still in office, and to know that it's good to be a pusher instead of a pushy. Having brought everyone successfully back, so we can leave you here at the gate. Maybe it was just a small, unexpected trip into some kind of 4D Disneyland, but here it is, the tape's running out, we know what time it is, and there's food in the other room, you can always go home and turn on TV. Even better than Alka-Seltzer, you know that reality that is just a step away just as soon as the tape gets over. It's good that we can have some of these chats about everyday problems that I am so delighted that I could be of some small potential help. The benefit of my great experience, my learning, the education, I'm humbly glad that I could be of some small benefit with your personal problems. I know I have been a lot of help with mine. Haven't I? Well, have I or not?